Good afternoon, this is Brown at IF Brown, and today we're going to be talking about Arion, Lord of Atlantis, issues 12 through 16. So issue 12 actually marked the return of series co-creator and original writer Paul Kupperberg, and after having completed work on issue 3, he temporarily left the series so he could catch up on the workload of writing outside of Arion, Lord of Atlantis. And so from issues 4 to 11, Doug Moench temporarily took over on the series, but issue 12 essentially marked the original creative team's return to this series. Kupperberg and artist Jan Duursema were back together again. So you had issue 12, issue 13, '14, not spooky at all, 15, and last but not least, 16. So at this point, Arion had been in a search for a way to regain his sorcerer's abilities. And at this point in time, the only magic they had was a sort of, sense that, say, magic was being used nearby in the area, as well as the ability to, use simple conjurer's tricks. But in the meantime, his lover and friend, Lady Cheyenne, was attempting to re-educate him in the way of physical combat, namely sword fighting, if you will. And so Arion had decided to go to the city of Tammuz, which happened to house a sort of sorcerer's sanctuary that his evil brother Garn had used. And seeing as how Garn was a sorcerer that was essentially on par with Arion and vice versa, Arion reasons that even though this is a fortress that housed a lot of dark activity, surely he'd be able to find something there that could help him on his quest to regain his powers, and so that way he'll be able to be at full peak again, and therefore be able to better guard Atlantis from threats. And so Arion, Lady Cheyenne, Wind, as well as the shapeshifter and former resident of Tammuz, Mara, all take a hovercraft on over to the city of Tammuz. And in the meantime, it turns out that they're not the only ones who have their eye on the sorcerer sanctuary. Former minion of Garn, the demi-human jackal Sinet, has decided to find a way to get into the sorcerer sanctuary as well, because he reasons that since Garn left him and his army high and dry, he can use Garn's own sorcerers powers and artifacts as a way of getting revenge, if not on Garn, then at the very least on the city of Atlantis. And so you got two parties with their eye on the prize, so to speak. And Arion and his party make it there first, followed shortly after by Sinet and his small army. But unfortunately, just because this the sanctuary is no longer inhabited by Garn, that doesn't mean it's without its safeguards, namely an army of monsters that slink out of the shadows and attack both parties. And so you got both physical threats and mental threats. You got illusions that make the party members attack each other, as in the people in Arion's group start to see each other as monsters, and same thing with Sinet's group. But Arion is able to tap into some lessons that Lady Cheyenne had recently helped to teach him, in a sense of not being fooled by what he sees, but basically by what he knows, some sort of mind over matter philosophy, if you will. And so he's able to essentially see through what the illusions, and also he's able to make it through along with his party members, and they're able to take out Snet's crew. And when they finally get to the heart of this sanctuary, there's a treasure chest, and all that's in there though is a sword hilt, but with no sword. And so at first everyone's like, "You've got to be kidding! We went through all that terror for this, a sword handle, and there's no sword." But Arion, he's pointing out that this was at the heart of the sanctuary, and it wouldn't have been here without reason. So he reasons that there is a power in this sword handle, but they have yet to figure it out what it is, and all they can do is leave the sanctuary alive. And so after having bound up Snet and his surviving party members as prisoners, they leave the sanctuary, and with the sword handle in hand. And it's shortly after that Lady Cheyenne had approached Wind with news of his people, namely that his father, the leader of his tribe, had recently passed away. And so Wind, who had unfortunately left his tribe on bad terms, has to make the reluctant decision to leave Atlantis and go to the hills where his tribe lives. And so after basic funerary rites are observed, there's a lot of talk amongst the tribe as to who should be leader, and technically it should be Wind, because he was the son of the ruler of the tribe. But there's a cousin of his who resents this, because he feels that he was he stayed with the tribe while Wind left. And so there's a conflict of interest in that regard, because on one hand you have this cousin who is basically is saying that he was loyal to the tribe, and he had stayed when Wind had left. But on the other hand, though, you have Wind, who biologically and technically speaking is the rightful ruler, due to simply being the son of the former king or leader of the tribe. And so the tribe's main shaman, a woman, by the way, which I found very interesting, she decrees that the two of them are to engage in this ritual, which will determine who will stay and lead and who will essentially die. It's one of those kind of rituals. And so Wind declares Arion to be his second, if you will, to accompany him on the journey, and his cousin enlists a sort of semi-corrupt but rising shaman to be his second. And it turns out that this corrupt shaman had actually slipped him a potion that would essentially give the cousin an advantage in strength and magical prowess over Wind. And unfortunately, though, both of them have drank of this potion, and the effects make themselves known when, after going up into the mountains, Wind is meditating, waiting for the appointed moment, which the spirits will commune with them, and his cousin attacks, but he's been changed into sort of this almost werewolf-like creature. And Wind, on the other hand, he doesn't turn into a monster, but he does get caught up in this bloodlust that the potion is affecting him with. And so the two of them struggle, and Arion, he's able to sense that magic is being used, even though he is limited in the power that he has. He can still sense that there is magic at work, and so he makes contact with the corrupt shaman, and tells him that this magic that he's messing with, it can destroy them both. Like, it can destroy not just the one who's he's wanting to work against, but the user of the magic as well. And so there's this brief battle that on one hand is between Wind and his now mutated cousin, and on the other hand there's a battle between Arion and this corrupt shaman. And so in the process, sort of a combination of effort, if you will, the cousin ends up being slain after having been I guess further mutated. And so after he's been slain, his spirit is departed of this plane of his existence, and Wind is officially now the ruler of the tribe. And so and the corrupt shaman, in Wind's own words, will now follow him. And so, before he goes back to his people, he and Arion say their farewells, and, basically, Arion's of the mind that, hey, we're definitely going to meet again. And so after that, Arion, Lady Cheyenne, and Mara are on their way back to Atlantis in the hovercraft, and they end up getting attacked by, sorcerer's fire. And they end up crashing in the city of Mu, which, if you'll recall, was the former home of Garn, and so this can't be a coincidence. Now, mind you, the most of the inhabitants of Mu had already escaped the city because of the Ice Age that had previously been taking over the world before Arion had destroyed it, along with the help of Estar. They had destroyed Frostfire, which was essentially the thing that was causing the Ice Age to be. But anyway, though, so the city was already kind of a ghost town, with only the most desperate still staying there. But on the other hand, though, since Garn had lived there, that was a further source of terror for the inhabitants of the city. And so, but since Garn's not there anymore, and the Ice Age is no longer an issue, the only people that are there are, either the most desperate or the most dangerous, criminals in the lot, mind you. And so they have multiple run-ins with, rogues and ruffians, but they end up coming across a priest for one of the Atlantean deities, and he gives them sanctuary in his, sort of humble abode, which happens to be like a castle. But it turns out that all is not as it seems, and this priest is actually an old friend / enemy of Arion's in disguise. And it turns out that this priest is Kaon, the god who embodies the cosmic form of chaos. And we hadn't seen him since the earlier issues of the series, but he's engaged in his own schemes against his siblings. So while they're obsessed with cosmic order, he's wanting to avenge himself on Arion and give himself an advantage over his siblings in the grand scheme of things. And so Arion, at this point, decides that he ends up having to use the sword handle, which seems to have a life of its own, and he's able to cut through the monsters that Kaon is using against him. And in the meantime, Lady Cheyenne and Mara are gravely injured by Kaon's mischievous actions. And so Arion, he ends up going rogue almost. He gives into his anger and attacks Kaon, but Kaon's threatening to use his magic to slay the priest that he has disguised himself as. But unfortunately, for him, Arion sees through the illusion because he knows that this priest never existed in the first place, and so he cuts through the illusion and nearly kills Kaon himself and casts him into the fire of this sort of mystical configuration that Kaon's summoned. And it turns out that while he killed this physical form of Kaon, he can't ultimately kill him because Kaon's a god. And so even though he was using a magic enhanced sword, it still just it didn't do the trick, so to speak. But Arion admits though that he wasn't as fully enthralled with Kaon as his friends thought that he was, because he had inadvertently injured Mara in the process, while he was seemingly enthralled to Kaon. And while he was to a point, he wasn't to the point where he was remembering Lady Cheyenne's lessons to not trust his sight, but to basically go off of what his intuition tells him. And so they don't really have any further they don't gain any more in terms of raw magical power, but Arion has learned to fight with his intuition even more than he already did because of his experience. And so at this point they make it out of the city of Mu, and in the meantime Wind is back with his people, and the ruling body is sort of divided. Some of them are willing to accept Wind as their ruler, and others are very resentful of the fact that this man who ran out of the tribe all those years ago because he wanted to live free is wanting to claim his lordship of the tribe. And so there's a lot of back and forth on that, but he ends up accepting the fact that he has a responsibility to the tribe, and he marries a woman named Fawn Dancer, who is the daughter of one of the highest ranked elders of the tribe, and so basically this further cements Wind's status as the tribe's ruler. And so there's a lot more security on the tribe's part in that regard now that they have a firmly established leader. But in the meantime, Arion, Lady Cheyenne, and Mara, they've escaped Mu and are going through the countryside, trying to make their way back to Atlantis, because unfortunately the hovercraft that they were initially in was destroyed by Kaon's enchantments, and so they're having to make the journey on foot. And in the process, though, they run afoul of a group of demi-humans, these sort of humanoid animals, and they're taken prisoner. And it turns out that these demi-humans are, in fact, the result of a series of scientific experiments that were conducted by people in Atlantis, arguably military personnel and all sorts of divisions of the scientific department, and so this is where you realize that magic is not the only aspect of corruption that is present in Atlantis. It turns out that the technology that is being used for corrupt purposes as well. And so this tribe of demi-humans, they they've been on the run, but every now and then they'll take stray, prisoners, like people who are outside of Atlantis, and basically, they'll give them the chance to fight to the death with one of them, and like one of the demi-humans. And so that's their way of getting revenge for the fact that they were once human but were forced to be turned into monsters. And so at this point, Arion is fighting their leader, who is a sort of lion-like demi-human, as you can see on the cover here. But while they're fighting, though, there's a member of the demi-human's party who makes himself known, and he was a former military general of Atlantis, who had become an enemy of Arion, because he was loyal to the king of Atlantis. And when he saw that the people of Atlantis were, worshiping Arion as the city's savior, he had wanted to, arrest Arion or execute him. But Arion himself had tried to talk the guy down, and so the guy, he was unwilling to accept, reason, and so he left the city. And in the meantime, he fell in with this group of demi-humans. And so, he says, hey, this guy's mine, and decides, to say, hey, let's end this here and now. So he and Arion engage in a duel, a sword duel. And initially, it's sort of an even split. They're both good fighters, but eventually the general, gets the advantage over Arion. And at this point, the sword handle, which Arion had initially thrown aside earlier because it was exerting a malevolent influence on him, as Lady Cheyenne pointed out, it mysteriously reappears, and they're fighting on the beach, and it suddenly washes up ashore, despite the fact that Arion had thrown it aside in the wilderness. And so, yeah, there's something pretty creepy about that. And so, in desperation, Arion grabs a hold of the hilt, and it springs to life. It's like this fire sword. And so, it has a mind of its own, as, it's shown earlier in the issues that it was present in. And he wounds the general and is about to kill him, but he realizes that this decision isn't his own, it's the sword's. And he realizes that this sword contains the essence of his late brother Garn. And so rather than give in to Garn's evil nature, he casts the hilt aside, and says that he's not going to kill his opponent, and there's no need to. And so at this point, the demi-humans who are holding Arion and his friends hostage, they're convinced that this is proof that not all Atlanteans are like the ones who had forced them into this existence of as monsters. And so due to this sort of contradictory demonstration of two forms of Atlantean nature, they decide to let Arion and his friends go on their way in peace, because at the very least it gave them some food for thought. And by the way, it turns out that Arion was keeping a secret from Lady Cheyenne and his friends. It turns out that when he and Garn had that final confrontation with one another, while Arion was the one of the two who emerged triumphant, physically speaking, he didn't actually kill Garn because he had recently learned that Garn was his brother. And so there was a sort of familial, bond that reared itself in his head, and he couldn't bring himself to strike the death blow. And so instead of killing Garn, he essentially absorbed Garn's essence into himself. And so unfortunately, Garn's evil was trapped within. And this has, been one of the, factors as to why Arion, seems to be, going back and forth between, the heroic person that he's trying to be, as well as the cold and calculating individual that he was at the start of the series. Because it turns out that Garn, is already exerting some influence over him, but Arion finding that sword handle in Garn's sanctuary has made this hold even stronger. And so the fact that Arion has realized this and thrown the sword handle aside, that shows that Arion is trying to fight back against it. And so while his companions seriously question his decision to absorb Garn's essence into himself, they do realize that he is trying to find a way to be a better person through his refusal to give in to the evil that the sword handle would have given him an advantage on. Basically, yes, it would have made him more powerful, but it would have been Garn's evil guiding him every step of the way. So this part of the journey back to Atlantis ends, and where we'll go from here, we shall have to see. So I really enjoyed these issues, and it was really cool to see Paul Kupperberg come back to this series. And I honestly think that behind the scenes, he and Doug Moench probably had a good working relationship, in the sense that Moench was probably working with notes and advice that Kupperberg had left before temporarily leaving the series. And when Kupperberg came back, Doug Moench had kind of returned the favor, gave him some notes and advice on what he did that helped with the series, or we thought helped. And so it's the writing is fairly seamless. This transition in writing is fairly seamless, and it's like one continuous story that flows rather well. And I like the fact that Kupperberg has a little more freedom this time around when it comes to further developing his characters, because when he was initially writing the series, as much as I enjoyed it, his work on it, you could tell that he was kind of bogged down in creating this new world, in establishing all this backstory and lore, and it was basically a lot of exposition, and he did a good job of conveying this exposition, but at the same time you could definitely tell it was a lot of exposition. So now that a lot of the exposition, the establishing exposition has been taken care of, Kupperberg seems to have some more creative freedom this time around, because these particular issues have a lot more of a creative flow that's not as cluttered by exposition. And granted, there's a lot of stuff that ties into events that happened earlier in the series, but having been reading the series since its beginning, I understood what was going on, and people who had been reading the series at the time understood what was going on as well. So this new direction in the series, or at least the new direction that the characters were going in, it made a lot of sense. And I also enjoy the fact, I appreciate the fact that Kupperberg was trying to convey the fact that while magic was a source of danger for Arion and his companions, as well as for Atlantis in general, it wasn't just magic, because magic does have its benefits as well, but there was also the aspect of technology or science, as shown with the story of the demi-humans. Because up until that point, there's been a push by the ruling bodies of Atlantis to rely more and more on technology. But any society in real life that relies exclusively on technology, they fall prey to a lot of the pitfalls of technology as well. And so, I think that they did. Even though a series was written in the early 80s, they did a pretty good job of touching on that. So even though this is more fantasy than science fiction, the fact that they had this development of science being unrestrained and having consequences. I did like that aspect of the story, and also the return of Kaon was pretty neat because Kaon and his siblings hadn't been seen since the introductory arc of the series, but the fact that Kaon was the one who orchestrated this scheme to land Arion and his companions in the former home of his evil brother. I mean, it's like it totally makes sense because Kaon is the embodiment of chaos, and so while his siblings are definitely the more responsible ones and are trying to put an emphasis on cosmic balance, it would make sense that Kaon's the one's like, no, I'm doing what I want to do. I'm causing bad things to happen. And so, his revenge scheme against Arion makes sense. And I also appreciated how, not just with him, but, with the Sorcerer's Sanctuary, where Arion and his companions found the sword hilt that belonged to Garn. You see how, all these creatures are they're dangerous by themselves, just because of how much of a threat they are physically, but then you see just how even more dangerous they are when they're in the thrall of evil sorcery, because visually speaking, Jan Duursema does a good job of bringing them to life, and each creature that you see is very unique. But at the same time, though, from a story perspective, they're even scarier because they're not scary in just a visual sense, but they're scary in a sense that, they just keep on coming at Arion and his companions, and regardless of how many of them are slain, they're never going to stop because they're not in control of themselves. I mean, yes, they have their baser instincts, in control, but at the same time, they don't have the sense to back off because they're being controlled by, dark magic. And so I thought that was pretty neat because I mean, you see how this dark magic, I mean, it doesn't just apply to the monsters, but it also applies to people as well, because whether it be citizens who have been corrupted by dark magic in a ghost town, or Arion and his companions being tricked into attacking each other because they see each other as monsters. I mean, you see that magic in the hands of an evil sorcerer, or at least the embodiment of cosmic chaos, you see just how much of a threat it could be. And Arion, was just so fortunate as a character to have someone like Lady Cheyenne in his corner, because I really liked how Kupperberg was further building on Doug Monk's development of having Lady Cheyenne further teach Arion to essentially rely on his intuition rather than strictly what he sees in the physical world. And as well, and that doesn't just apply to combat, but it applies to life as well. But the fact that she's continuing to teach him in the art of self-defense and sword fighting, and it really comes in handy because even when Arion is increasingly enthralled to his brother's dark energy with the sword, you can tell that he's fighting back against it, and he's having to force himself to come to push past this driving negative energy that Garn's exerting on him. And so, but because he's got someone like Lady Cheyenne in his corner, I mean, the fact that she's got some really good advice and she's very loyal to him, but also the fact that she's a dangerous individual in her own right when it comes to physical fighting. I mean, the guy's lucky to have her on his side, and have basically even if they weren't lovers, I mean, she's one hell of a friend. And also, I did like how initially I was kind of disappointed that Wind was no longer what Wind had left Arion and his companions, because initially I was thinking that him being the new ruler of his people was Kupperberg's way of writing the character out and putting more focus on Arion and Lei, Cheyenne, and Mara. But that wasn't necessarily the case. So even though at this point in time, Wind is no longer with Arion and his companions, he's still getting a good amount of focus. Kupperberg was doing a good job of going further into the lore of the culture of Wind's people, and Jan Duursema, I thought, did a really good job of bringing this group of people to life. And there's a really nice shot in issue 16, and it's during a wedding ceremony at night, where you see Wind being married to Fawn Dancer. And let me find it real quick. There you go. I love this picture. I mean, so even though this is like a fictional setting, Duursema is she's one of those artists who, can, bring so much life into something fictional to where, it looks like something that could conceivably have happened, aeons ago. And and I like that. I like both the visual aspect as well as the writing aspect of this further exploration of Wind and the culture of his people. And I also liked how you got further insight into Wind as an individual, because not only was he a loyal friend and companion and guard for Arion, but he also he's learned over the years that he can't run from his responsibilities. So even though he doesn't want to be the ruler of his people, he realizes that he has to be. And so he ultimately makes the decision to, give up on, his dream of, going on adventures with Arion and his companions, and, essentially stepping up and saying, okay, I'll be the leader and the man I need to be for my people. And so, I did like the glimpse that we got of the character of Fawn Dancer. She's just being introduced, but she seems, to be, a nice, shy, woman who nonetheless is wanting to do what's right for her people. And she's understandably nervous about, marrying Wind, because of the reputation he has for initially leaving his people. But Wind's, trying to convince her. I mean, he's saying, look, I was a different person then. I want to do the right thing now, and I will be, the loyal husband that you need me to be. And she in turn says that she'll be the loyal wife that she needs him to be. And so you do see a bit of a connection going there, because they're being married because they have to be, by tribal law. But at the same time, though, I like that there's actually a spark of a mutual attraction that you see between the two. So, I'm curious to see where this goes. So I'm going to go ahead and give issues 12 through 16 of Arion, Lord of Atlantis, 4 out of 5 stars. They're pretty good. It was nice to see Paul Kupperberg come back to this series, and Jan Duursema continues to do a good job of further adding to this fascinating world on a purely visual level, and the two of them make a very good team. I also neglected to mention that it was issue 14 that marked the return of issue 14 was where Bob Smith took over as inker, whereas issue 13, Tom Mandrake it was his last issue of inking the series. But both Mandrake and Bob Smith were very good inkers, and they worked very well with Jan Duursema's pencils. And so the writing still has that very organic, fluid look to it. That was my take on issues 12 through 16, and I'm continuing to enjoy this series, and I look forward to seeing what comes next. So thank you for taking the time to check out my review. Y'all have a good day. Take care. Goodbye. Oh, and by the way, if y'all like what you see here, you got any questions, comments, or please feel free to hit that like button and subscribe, or just drop a line in the comments section. Anyway, adios. Bye.